Hi there, it's me again with another great conversation with another brilliant person. Yeah, that's right. Earlier I dropped a conversation with David Rothkopf, and now I'm back with a conversation with Celeste Headlee. I think I said the word conversation a record amount of times in 25 seconds, so I'm deeply apologetic about that. But I promise you the rest of this podcast is going to make up for it. And also, that's just proof that I rarely script anything. Okay, well, Celeste Headlee is one of our favorites, and at the beginning here, I invited her to join our next Pod Jam gathering. Last night at our hangout, we decided that our next stand-up community gathering will be September 5th through 7th at Slate Hill Edible Forests. That's Kevin Richberg's farm in upstate New York. He's got acres and acres of beautiful land in upstate New York, in the town that I grew up in, and so we decided that we're going to have a gathering there. We don't know exactly what it's going to be. The details are being planned as we speak, but put that on your calendar. You are invited, if you're a stand-up subscriber, to join us at Farm Jam, September 5th through 7th at Kevin Richberg's farm, Slate Hill Edible Forest, and details are to come. If you'd like to be part of the planning committee, planning board, let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com, and we hope to see you again for another fun few days in beautiful upstate New York, right there on the Finger Lakes. It's going to be awesome. All right. Well, my conversation with Celeste Headlee is what I've got for you. It's a special show, so I'm not doing the news. It's just special episode, just a conversation with Celeste Headlee, who is a longtime journalist and author and expert. She's written several books, including Speaking of Race, Why Everybody Needs to Talk About Racism and How to Do It, as well as We Need to Talk, How to Have Conversations That Matters, and probably her most popular book is called Do Nothing, How to Break Away from Overworking, Overdoing, and Underliving. I caught up with Celeste yesterday to talk about everything that's happening in the world, the way that she sees it, and I always love to hear the way that she sees it. I always learn a lot from my conversations with Celeste Headlee. You should go follow her and support her on all the social media and everywhere else. All the links to Celeste's work are in today's show notes. So let's do it right now with the always awesome Celeste Headlee. I'm very happy to see you. I have decided that you are on the top of the list to invite to our next annual gathering of the stand-up community. We just did it for the second time this year. We invited some of our favorite guests for the second time this year. And I so hope that next year, if we do it, or wherever we do it, a lot of people talk about you and would love to meet you in person and get the opportunity to do a little Q&A and even go to one of our soirees. It was pretty interesting to see like regular guests on the show with longtime listeners just having a drink and chit-chatting, which I know you'd be really good at. I don't know if that's your favorite place to be, but I feel like you'd be pretty comfortable.
Yeah, I would totally hang out. What's funny, speaking of comedians, I do a lot of workshops and keynotes about communication, and a lot of communication experts give this advice that people should use humor in their communication, and I go the absolute other way. I'm like, do not. If you're not funny, if you're not a funny person, then using humor makes it more awkward. Like, it's going to be bad. So don't.
But I feel like even the humorless can find a line for their keynote speech or something. But yeah, you're absolutely right. If people haven't told you your whole life, or
that's the key, right? Other people have to tell you're funny.
Yeah.
It can't be, I think I'm funny.
It's the worst because I've had, as a comedian, I've had so many people. I tell the story whenever I work with Glenn Kirshner, we do all these public appearances together, and he always rips me and then hands me the mic, so I rip him back pretty hard, which is when he first met me, he walked into the green room at MSNBC. We were both on panel together, and he's a 30-year federal prosecutor, he's a big, tough guy, and he says, people tell me I'm pretty funny myself. And I just looked at him dead in the eye because I was just going to alpha this dude because he's such a big, tough guy himself. I go, actually, funny people don't need to be told. You don't need to tell people that you're funny. And that was that. I ruined that line, but yeah.
Yeah, it's the saying that's true. Like all the people that try to put a joke at the beginning of their keynote speeches, so they Google search great joke to open a speech or whatever.
My favorite online ad I've seen lately is make money giving speeches. I'm like, has anybody ever done that? Has anybody ever
started from I want to be a speaker. Like most of us who make money giving talks and like you backed into it. In your case, you've written several books and had an over 20-year career as a journalist, which gives you the credibility and the talent to be able to do it. But like the idea that you're just going to be like, I think I'll become a paid speaker tomorrow.
So a lot of people do that. They really do that. And many of the speakers I know did it exactly the way I do. You became a speaker because somebody asked you to speak and was willing to pay you for it. And I've even written a piece that says, I don't know how to help you become a speaker. Because everyone asks me, I don't know if they ask you to. I have no idea. Have a 25-year career in journalism and have a top 10 TEDx.
Well, I backed into journalism through stand-up. So I started as a speaker trying to get laughs every 20, 30 seconds. And I would tell people, start there and torture your every nook and cranny of your soul by pursuing a career or even 1 year as a stand-up comedian, because it is the worst existence in art, I feel.
It really, yeah.
Performance art.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It also, just one more thing on that. It's like many of the people who approach me about advice on how to become a speaker, and again, I don't have any advice, in my opinion, they have too much ego to be a speaker. And that seems weird because a lot of people think that you have to have a big ego to be a speaker. But the fact of the matter is you're going to bomb. Yeah. People are going to hate you. Things are going to go wrong. Your mic is going to go out. They're going to put you in a terrible room somewhere. Like you're going to be treated sometimes poorly. And
that's a great point about the ego, which is why I think my entire live radio career and even in this moment, and you wrote a book about how to communicate, but like I am thinking, I have an inner monologue going all the time saying, is this interesting? Is this interesting? Because it doesn't matter if it's not that interesting if we're not recording it, but if we expect people to press play or tune in, it should be at minimum interesting.
Or pay you money to speak? Yeah, exactly. Yes. And you have to be open to the fact that some people aren't going to be interested.
I'm not open to that.
Okay, then. Yeah. Anyhow, that said,
there's a bunch of things I wanted to talk with you about. But first, I just had to get like your top line reaction to what we've seen play out with the Trump administration. Particularly, I just wanted to ask you on the trade war, the tariffs, the caving, the blinking, how you see just that part. I want to ask you about some of the other things that we're seeing play out with this administration, as well as the reaction to it, the protests and so on. But just we're a day separating when Trump, I think, caved or blinked. Some people think he did it on purpose to short the market. That was the whole plan. What are your thoughts on both the political strategy, the economic strategy, and most interestingly, the media's reaction to it?
First of all, I want to be very clear, especially to my colleagues in journalism. There has not been a pause on tariffs. Those 10% across the board tariffs still exist. There's 125% on China. There's no pause in the tariffs right now. So make sure you're very accurate before you use the White House's language to describe anything.
And that's true of any government solicitation, any government press release. I probably learned that from you. In terms of journalism, you don't take it, even if you tend to support that person or that agency, yes. You don't take it. You have to, and just reprint it. You have to question the framing, always question the framing of it. And that's such good advice. Tariffs are not paused.
They are not. It has been driving me crazy to see all these headlines that say paused. No pause. The other thing I will say, that's interesting because we've talked about this before. I'm currently writing a book, and I'm in the second draft of a book about my great-grandmother. But I've already started the notes and outlines for the book I'll write next, which is essentially, for me, the natural extension of Do Nothing was about the toxic productivity that we've all been brainwashed to dig into. But the next step for me was to dig more into the mind manipulation that has been used on us in order to allow the wealthiest to just take all of our money.
Oh, that's a really very interesting topic. I wonder about that all the time. And my one point I've been saying is and I'm trying to say it to my MAGA neighbors on our local Facebook page where I love to live, and just ask them why. I thought we all agreed that the super wealthy, the wealthiest amongst us, didn't have our best interests in mind generally, and we're not necessarily to be respected or trusted. And I'm wrong about that. This kind of wealth is revered and pursued. And so I'm just making it be that binary and thinking that there didn't used to be this divide about people of wealth. But then again, I don't know the history of human civilization on this issue. I just thought we always didn't like the richest guy around. But I'm very interested to hear a quick thought, an intro to that book of yours.
Yeah, because what we're seeing with the tariffs is just blatantly and openly taking money, like literally risking the crash of a global economy in order to make a quick buck for yourself and your friends. And I have to imagine that people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who made, I think, I may have this figure wrong, but hundreds of thousands because she knew in advance that the lifting of some tariffs was coming, but she wasn't the only one. So I think we're probably going to get an investigation showing that this was very much, if Martha Stewart belonged in jail.
You think there was a heads up given that they were going to do
absolutely.
Because it also feels like you could have just guessed that they were based on the history of this man's actions. He always seems to fold, and specifically on these tariffs negotiations, we've seen it with Canada and Mexico first a few weeks ago at the beginning. He said, takes it right up to midnight and is, you know what, just kidding. So it could,
but he didn't. He put them in place and allowed the stock market to crash. And then some people, and the reason I say why some people were heads up is because it's looking like some of the incredible reporting coming from places like Wired and other places that there was a short list of people who at within a small span of time went back and anyhow. So
I had not seen that reporting, but the idea that any congressman person or policymaker or anyone should be able, not anyone, but any congressperson should be able to invest in stocks and companies is, I cannot see how anybody's okay with that. And
I can't either. But you know what? And also we just got news out from Wired that they found a service agreement between the Department of Labor and Doge of like something like $1.5 million to pay for the salaries of 4 Doge employees. So you can divide that by 4, right? And see how much these people are getting paid to fire incredibly talented, experienced, credentialed professionals. Yeah. Just to go back to what I was talking about before, for basically since the Industrial Revolution, what began this sort of covert manipulation of values that turned all of the societal values that we had that sort of disdained open talk about wealth, right? That did see wealth as money as the root of all evil. That changed about 250 years ago, and it has since been getting worse and worse until we've gotten to this point where we now see the existence of a big bank account as proof positive that you are smarter and better than other people. And therefore, in order to earn status in society, and all of us do that, we're Homo sapiens, our status in society is existential for us, right? That's our survival. In order to earn that status, most people are chasing more and more money well beyond what they need. And here's the thing, Pete. For so long, we've done all these studies, for example, into the effects of poverty on children, especially. And that's all 100%. We should be studying that because poverty can really disadvantage a child as they develop.
Yep.
But equally so, the research also shows that a child born into great wealth is equally disadvantaged. Like a child born into great wealth is at a disadvantage. And there's a lot of negative markers for a kid who has everything.
That surprises me to hear, and I think I've been saying the opposite about rich kids my entire life. I don't like what you're saying. I don't like how it's making me feel.
So there's different types of disadvantages, right? For the child in poverty, they're going to be disadvantaged in terms of access to healthcare, access to employment, access to investment capital, being able to start their own business, all of the things related to financial and professional success. Now, the rich kids will have all of that. They have all those advantages, and they are miles ahead of the most other people. But they are disadvantaged in a bunch of other ways in terms of their ability to sustain relationships, their empathy, their compassion, a lot of things that we think of as that make someone an actual good person, they are substantially disadvantaged. It is so much harder for a child of wealth to be a compassionate person than a child of poverty. It is so much harder. Let me tell you how much harder it is. They've done studies in which all they've done is given people a thought experiment. Let me give it to you right here. I want you to imagine the richest person on the planet, Elon Musk, right? Let's say that he's at the top of this rank, right? He's at the top of this ladder. Now, with the rest of humanity beneath him, imagine where you are on that ladder, right?
I see me. Go ahead.
Now, if I were to test your empathy right now, your empathy, you'd score fairly well for empathy. That's what the test research shows. On the other hand, I want you to imagine the most destitute person on the planet. I don't mean just homeless. I don't mean just jobless. I mean somebody who has absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Okay? Here they are at the bottom of that ladder. And where are you above them? How far up on the ladder are you above this person? Right? Now, if I were to test your empathy again, you would score very badly. Just with that thought experiment, thinking of yourself as so much better off than this person crashes your ability to empathize with another person.
Well, what I thought of, the worst situation that a person could be in, I at first thought of abject poverty, living in sewage in a tin cabin somewhere.
If they even have a cabin, right? Ugh.
If they have any shelter. And then I thought of someone who is a quadriplegic. And then I settled on that. I was like, I feel like that's probably, but then I thought, I have empathy for that person. I'm thinking about that person as being, not having the use of their body, must be like living in a permanent prison. That's my worst kind of nightmare. Not dementia. A lot of people say dementia and Alzheimer's. I'm like, no, I don't want to be paralyzed all the way.
Yeah. For this particular experiment, what you're thinking of is somebody in terms of poverty, not in terms of disability.
Oh, that ruined it.
Yeah, because that sparked your empathy. But if you're thinking of it, because when they're doing a study, they'll be much more careful about it. But we're talking about somebody, who's just completely destitute.
I still thought it would be interesting to tell you what I thought about, but yes, wasn't within the paradigm of such a study. But it is a fascinating thing, something I want to learn more about. Every time I talk to you, I always run into something I had never even thought about. I want to learn more about, and that will probably be at least one of today's. You brought up, is there anything else to say about the politics or the media's handling of this trade war? You mentioned, I think that one of the most important things is don't take the top line, the conventional wisdom, much less the administration's word for it's a pause. It's not a pause. The tariffs continue, and they've even been raised on China. Now we're in a trade war, and China is almost the only country that matters the most in a lot of ways for a lot of reasons. But any other thoughts about what we just witnessed and how this plays out in any way? Part of me almost, you've heard the people that say, I want everything to come crashing down. The sooner, the better. The only way that we are free of this man is if he directly makes people absolutely miserable that are feeling pretty good right now.
I would never say that, because
so many people say it. And
I know, I hear that, but that's a privilege to be in that position. That's a privilege to be in that position where you know that you and your loved ones aren't going to die because of the crash. There was the case in Wisconsin where one of the very first things, if not on the first day, early on, Trump did was to cancel out the executive order Joe Biden signed, lowering the cost of insulin, inhalers, etc., pharmaceuticals. And there was a guy in Wisconsin who suddenly, when that happened, the cost of his inhaler went up astronomically, couldn't afford it, and died. Be very careful before you say, I hope it all crashes.
Very, very good point, and a hard thing to argue with. And there's a lot of going right to that. Who loses is who dies, who literally dies. And then you move up to who has to file bankruptcy because they can't afford their medical bills, they lost their job, etc. So,
not to mention the children who are in school. You can't redo third grade.
We've been mostly focused on, I've heard a lot of personally and just in terms of news media and even politicians talking about the most vulnerable person right now. the person who lost the most is someone who is close to retirement and has a lot invested in the stock market, some investment portfolio, and they just lost 5 or 10 years of gains in a day. Those people are the ones that are standing to lose. And yet when you put it the way you put it and all the other obviously points, you're obviously right. Yes, people could die.
Yeah. But I will say what's shocking me is that, like I said, we have for 200 or 300 years been getting this line of bullshit that the wealthy are better, that they are more smarter, which Elon Musk proves incorrect. So does Donald Trump, etc. There's a certain wiliness around a lot of very wealthy people, but that's not the same as intellect. But what shocks me is that it's 100% open now, and people don't seem to care. The bill that they're putting forth that's being debated in the House right now guts the programs we pay for. We put money into Social Security so that we have the benefit of it when we age out of employment. Medicaid, Medicare, all of these programs that we have paid for, they are gutting those and just looting them. And this bill gives over $7 trillion to billionaires of our money. And it's an open theft. And why is that not 100% what everyone is talking about? The fact that people are saying this has to come crashing down, it's happening before our eyes, and people are still not getting it. They're still thinking they're somehow going to resolve into some kind of Hollywood happy ending, and it's not.
I feel like for years, we've heard arguments from conservatives and right-wing radio. You've heard these arguments. You always knew when a caller called the show and said, taxes are theft. It's the government taking my money. The example you're giving is actually theft. That's what's ironic.
That's real theft.
Those are my taxes. It was taken out of my check, and I'm supposed to get it back in a payment or in healthcare because I paid into it. That's theft. It's there. It's in a savings account.
Yeah, taxes aren't theft. The taxes are literally a discount program. Same way that they're a discount program. You can't afford a road.
Right.
You can't afford to pave your road.
Right.
But if everybody on your street puts in, you all can't afford to pave that road. That's what taxes are for. We can't afford the American military, but those same conservatives are really happy when the American military zooms into wherever they are and bombs everybody or flexes their muscles. That individual can't afford it, but together we can. That's what taxes are. They're just a discount program to where your collective dollars mean more than your individual dollars.
I've never heard it described that way. What's taken me so long to hear it that way? It's absolutely, taxes are a discount program for things that you couldn't afford on your own, like a bus ride to school.
Yeah.
And they're the price of civilization at the same time. But my point, getting back, was they're taking those.
They're literally stealing it. The money is intended to build our roads, to pay for our schools, to pay for our insurance, to make sure that we and our seniors are taken care of when we're not working anymore. And they are literally going in there, taking the money we paid for that and putting it into their bank account so they can fly to the moon. That is literally what is happening before our eyes, is theft of the money I have spent a lifetime paying. It is enraging to me that people are still talking about, how Donald Trump is playing chess, not checkers or whatever. No, he's just stealing money for himself and your friends. That's literally what's happening.
Himself and his friends. You said himself and your friends. That'd be amazing if he was stealing your money from your friends.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd be happy about that.
Yeah, but he's not.
I got to ask you if you've been paying attention to, we have to have a way of measuring how far into George Orwell's 1984 we've actually gotten. And I don't know where you think we are, but we're definitely at the place where the federal government is going to universities and colleges, the top ones, and telling them what they can or cannot teach, and specifically getting very specific into their curriculums. And if they don't do what they're told, then they won't get hundreds of millions of federal dollars. Now, I don't know what the difference between a private university that has $1 billion endowment versus state university is, where the funding gets and where the pressure inputs are. But I felt like that seemed very much into the novel 1984, where the federal government is telling colleges what they can teach if they want to get paid. That seems the antithesis of what college and universities are supposed to be doing.
It's also puts the lie to all of the conservatives' complaints that they want government staying out of private institutions and private companies, and also states' rights. Many of these colleges are either private institutions that they are trying to remove grants from, or they are state institutions, and they're not allowed. They're trying to step in and muscle even what colleges can teach that have the approval of their state legislatures, that have the approval of voters in that state. So either conservatives value the voices of individuals and their ability to claim autonomy for themselves and decide what kind of state they want to live in, or they don't. Either they value the rights of a private institution to operate the way that it wants and succeed or fail on its own, or they don't. And the hypocrisy of all of this is ridiculous, not to mention, of course, the thin-skinned conservatives who cannot bear any criticism of themselves, which is basically what we're talking about. You mentioned George Orwell, and I wrote a whole piece about this because everybody invokes his name and they haven't read any of his things, but in particular, conservatives invoke George Orwell all the time. And I just want to warn any conservative about doing that, because George Orwell once said, "It's curious how people take it for granted that they have a right to preach at you and pray over you as soon as your income falls below a certain level." He was not a capitalist. He went undercover living as a homeless person in both Paris and London to figure out what it felt like to be destitute. Now, we could talk along from our 21st century position about the appropriation and this white guy doing that, but he described how different he felt when he put on this dirty clothing. He said, "Dirt is a respecter of persons. It lets you alone when you're well dressed, but as soon as your collar is gone, it flies toward you from all directions." He just was not a capitalist. And to invoke 1984 without having read it is danger, Will Robinson.
I want to read that piece. By the way, I give myself kudos being like, I didn't need to ask Celeste if she can talk about George Orwell and where I bet you she can. And then Celeste's like, oh, I just wrote a piece. But not George Orwell, regardless of kind of economic systems, he was seemingly very much against totalitarianism. I feel like totalitarianism
and fascism. Oh, he was a big anti-fascist. And as you were alluding to, it sounds like you're alluding to his career of fighting against the silencing of speech of all kinds. And you're absolutely right. He was absolutely anti-fascist. He gave so many wonderful warnings about it. George Orwell was ahead of his time in so many ways, and this is one of them, in terms of the freedom of speech. On the other hand, he understood the limits of free speech. He understood the limits of not allowing people to make hateful, threatening statements and talk about especially marginalized communities, in his case, the Jews, in a way that endangered their lives.
I'm not that familiar with his thoughts on that. On the limits of speech.
He was incredible. He was quite the thinker. One of his first pieces was about being so torn up and conflicted after watching the British soldiers, he was stationed there for a while, murder an elephant. And I encourage everyone to read that piece. He was torn up about it. And it was his commentary on the dangers of too much power. So, yeah, then say anything else you might want about the comparisons being made, which seem pretty apt. A lot of smart people I read and follow are making them, who also studied Orwell, and specifically, I guess, 1984, but you could look across his work, his essays, his other books. But I feel like there are a lot of elements of totalitarianism. We just talked, obviously, about the markets and him and Trump being the decider on markets, on trade, on taxes, on government spending, and
arguably in many ways on the courts, because the Supreme Court seems to side with him far more than it doesn't, owns it. And so what are some of the other elements that you think are wrong when people make observations about the kind of Orwellian depiction of, prediction of, and where we're at in terms of totalitarianism? As I want to keep doing that word than any other.
At one point, and if any of your listeners catch me out, I don't have all these quotes memorized exactly, so I apologize if I paraphrase.
Oh, they won't. We're not huge oral people here. No, I don't know.
He said, looking at the whole world, the drift for decades has been not towards anarchy, but towards the reimposition of slavery. The White House official account tweeted out today, "Do not retaliate and you will be rewarded."
That sounds. Oh, it was your Twitter or your Blue Sky feed that either shared or made the observation that woman who has been abused, person who's been abused, and have talked to therapists or any expert on abuse that say that's the language of abusers.
That's the language of abusers. And also, I follow the expertise of those who have spent their careers studying fascism and totalitarianism, not just in the United States, but all around the world.
Yeah, they seem.
And those experts say this is the road. We are well down the road towards authoritarianism and fascism. They identify this. Here's the steps toward fascism. Yeah. Here we go.
Yeah.
And don't believe me. Believe the people who have literally made it their career to study this. And they say we are headed toward a fascist state. And there are already certain acts, decisions, and statements that have been made that are part of fascism and authoritarianism. So you don't have to believe me. I'm not an expert in this field. But it's happening. There's not really any denying it, because it is what it is. There's a definition. Yeah. Words mean something. There's a definition of fascism. There's our markers for it so that we can measure it. We have fallen so far down on the democracy scaling worldwide that it's ridiculous. And it was George Orwell himself who said that freedom means the freedom to say 2 + 2 makes 4. And that's literally where we are right now.
I think you make the mistake that this isn't fascism because it isn't exactly like the fascism of the past. Of course it's not. This is America, the internet, social media, television, and those things weren't around nearly as much in obviously in 1930s and in other countries and other times where you saw this is a whole different kind of fascism. But make no mistake, it tracks as according to, as you mentioned, Tim Snyder, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, Jason Stanley. I'm sure you can add 4 or 5 more scholars who study this stuff and been writing about it. My friend Kenneth C. Davis wrote a whole book about strongmen as well and has talked about the history of this as well as the Orwellian aspects of all of it. So it trips people up when it doesn't look exactly like the past. But it's so close. The guy paints himself.
Yeah, there's Jennifer Gandhi at Yale. There's so many. And if we're not heading towards fascism and authoritarianism, then those words don't mean anything.
I think the one thing I knew I wanted to ask you about was specifically, and this falls in this category, I guess, the erasure. I say erasure as opposed, some people say eraser of history and the horrifying specifics of it. We could probably spend the next 5 minutes listing the things that have been done, but just past week, they took down this picture of Harriet Tubman and rewrote the Underground Railroad. They're trying to erase the idea of slavery or reinvent it or rewrite it. They're also, apparently, Trump doesn't like the slavery part of the African American Museum in Washington, D.C., which if you haven't been, you got to go to it before.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
So I just wanted to ask you any thoughts around this consistent effort to erase specifically, I just want to, you can say whatever you want, but specifically the history of slavery and discrimination and marginalization of black bodies and black people. We could easily talk about women and gay folks, all the rest, but they seem real hell-bent on the issue of taking the Tuskegee Airmen, Jackie Robinson. He was DEI. What's a better example of meritocracy than that guy? What are your thoughts on what's happened recently?
There was an excellent piece in the New York Times just a couple days ago.
Oh, Christina Greer.
Christina Greer.
I was going to ask you about that because Christina's on the show today. She's a good friend of mine. I had her on to talk about that piece. I know you shared that piece. It's called Black People Aren't Surprised. What are your takeaways, or what would you add to it?
So the reason that I bring it up is because the attempt to erase history is not new. First of all, when Black Americans were brought here from Africa, the enslavers from the North and South were very successful in erasing their history and their true culture, right? They would split them up so they didn't have a whole bunch of Yoruba people all in the same place so that they couldn't preserve their language, couldn't preserve their cultures, etc. But also, just take a look at the South's phenomenal success with the lost cause myth, beginning with Thomas Dixon and his horrible books, The Leopard Spots, and then, of course, the book that inspired Birth of a Nation. Look at Birth of a Nation itself. One of the most popular movies ever in American history, and certainly the most popular of the silent era, that 100% rewrote history successfully, so much so that if you look at American history textbooks, especially in grade schools, they are more likely to reflect the lost cause, erasure, and myth than what actually happened. Look at the way that we view Reconstruction. It's finally getting a rewriting, but we have for decades been taught that Reconstruction was a failure, that Black Americans weren't ready to be in state legislatures, etc., and there was corruption and all this mistakes, and it was a huge failure that caused all these problems. And it was absolutely the opposite. So what's happening now, yes, it's horrifying and it's awful, but it surprises absolutely not one African American. Right. This has been done and successfully in the United States for forever. And I should mention that if you are not an African American and so you feel like you don't care about this, let me just tell you that the research is so clear on how this disadvantages you and your children, and how this puts you in a better place. And in fact, if you read things and all the research, especially the incredible book, Dying of Racism, it shortens your lifespan, what's happening.
Dying of Whiteness?
Dying of Whiteness, thank you.
Jonathan Metzl.
Yeah. A fantastic book that has all the receipts there for you. Trying to create this comforting world of Song of the South, right? This world that you like, that is familiar to you because this is what you were taught. It comforts you in the moment, but over time it's doing serious damage to your well-being, both emotional and physical. And it is definitely not good for the country.
That just made me think of a horrible joke, but that a physician could tell a white man in his 50s or 60s or whatever, just gives him a exam and then says, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Dominic." What is it? You're dying of whiteness. Had you only realized that you should have voted differently, that you should have supported this idea or that idea, you would have been able to afford the therapy needed to heal. But you can't because you voted for rich people to get all of your money. And now you're going to die. It's a really great point, and I'm so glad that you mentioned Chrissy's piece. It was really good, and I love talking to her about it. I will let you go. I hate to, but before I do have to ask you one final question about the reaction, the resistance. I was out in the streets on Saturday. They had rallies all over the country. I'm a part of my indivisible group. We're trying to do whatever we can. They've seen a lot of people reacting, saying, the resistance has finally arrived. Maybe it's too late. What do you make of the reaction to everything that we've been talking about?
So obviously, as a journalist, I'm not allowed to participate in those. I'm allowed to tell you what's happening, not be part of it. So I will say the fact that so many came out, the fact that so many people took to the streets, even in districts that Trump took by double digits, is remarkable. And I think it shows that we don't need everything to crash further than it is. There are enough people in the country that see what's going on. You only need, what is it, experts say, 3.5% or something of the population to start a revolution. And I'm not talking about a bloody revolution or France. I'm talking about a change in leadership. And again, not advocating for that. I'm just saying that is what is possible. I am advocating for the kind of leadership that follows its own tenets, that if you take a vow saying that you're going to do things in the good of the American public, that's what you actually do, which we do not have right now. I do advocate for a representative democracy, which we don't have right now. So I think that the protests in the streets, understanding their limitations, that a protest is not actually rewriting policy, but it's a step towards that, and it's a powerful step. And it also inspires other people to see that they are not alone. They are not the only ones that think that things are wrong.
That's so important. That's what I felt and realized. No matter what happens, being out there, knowing that there's a lot more people that, like you, feel like there has to be change. By the way, Chrissy Greer, who wrote that piece, Black People Are Not Surprised, also made the comment. She said, how many Black people did you see out there? I go, not many. And then she said, yeah, we're done. We told you. It's your job to fix it right now. We're exhausted. And I know she was generalizing, speaking about Black women specifically voting 92% or something against this, whatever this is. But still, it's pretty white so far, it seems. I'll just say that.
I'm writing a book about my great grandmother who started fighting this stuff in the 19th century. And if you go back through history, Black women in particular have been fighting this since almost the moment they stepped foot on this land. And I myself am tired. I go back and tell the history of my family and I think, for God's sake, for me and my family, what's the point? Nobody's listening to us. When all those things were happening during the age of lynching and the Red Summer of 1919, the prevailing discussion in the United States, the hot takes, all of the thought pieces and the op-eds were about America's Negro problem. Because lynching is a Negro problem? Like, at some point we have to understand that the problem, and therefore the people expected to solve that problem, aren't Black people in general, and they're definitely not Black women.
I love talking to you. You're like, you started with Wikipedia, but you're like Google the whole time, bringing in all these nuggets from history and literature. It's always really informative and educational, just talking to you about anything. Thank you, as always, Celeste, for joining us. I really appreciate you and all of your wisdom and thoughts and generosity.
It's always great to talk to you, Pete. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, there she goes, Celeste Headlee, everybody. Go follow her, support her. All the links to her work and her books are in today's show notes. Thank you very much for supporting me and my work. I'll be back tomorrow with a great conversation with one of our favorites, Christian Finnegan, looking back at the week and more. Always a great day when we get him. And thanks again to Celeste. Thank you to you. Can't do it without your support. Thank you so much for your paid subscription. If you haven't signed up for one, hey, you're here listening at the end. You're a bumblebee maybe, and you haven't signed up. Maybe upgraded. I don't know. I appreciate it either way. Thanks so much for listening, contributing, being part of our community, like John Carroll, whose new album is a must-buy. If you haven't downloaded, paid for John Carroll's album, go do it now, johncarroll.org. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Be the change you want to see, everybody. Oh, and how about this quote to end the show? Who shared this with us last night? I think it was Dr. Terry Ashby and Nick DiFabrizio were talking last night, and I really love this one, so I want to end it. It's Ram Dass, spiritual leader, who said, whether this is the first day of the apocalypse or the first day of the golden age, the work remains the same. Love each other and ease as much suffering as possible. Yeah, let's do that. Talk to you tomorrow.
That's right. We got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt. Down off of your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience.